All right, folks. So before I let my good friend Tom George in the video, I just want to say that we are very lucky that Tom has agreed to do this, and I hope that everyone enjoys this. Tom is a good friend of mine, and I will talk a lot more about how we know each other. But again, please follow along, listen closely. He's going to have a lot of really good things to say and has a ton of experience. So I will go ahead and invite him in here in a second. Oh, man.
How you doing?
How you doing?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, thank you for agreeing to do this on such short notice.
Oh, of course, of course.
I expect that we'll get some good viewership on this.
Yeah, yeah, I hope
Yeah.
so. Yeah,
Franco.
yeah, Franco's in the house.
Oh, right on. So how you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you? How are you? How's
I'm
it going?
great. I'm
Yeah,
great. I mean, as good as I could be. I've been thinking a lot about sort of like how to move forward from this, and obviously, like when you think about it, you rely on the people that you know the best, and it's usually through sports like rowing. So
right. Yeah, 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 for
yeah,
sure.
been thinking about sort of like you know the best way to approach this thing, and I think that staying connected is so important right now. So that's why I reached out to you, got you involved.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
appreciate it. Where are you at the moment?
I'm at home right now. I'm in Stanford.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm at my place. What about you? Are you at home?
yeah. You're back at my parents' place. No,
Yeah.
like, sort of dipped out of Henley when things started to like lock down and
Right.
the training center got closed. It just didn't really make sense to stay in an apartment when got quite a lot more space back here, so it was good.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So let's get into a little bit. So um, for those of you who aren't aware, so Tom, this is Tom George. He's Princeton class of 2018. He's on the Great Britain men's team. He's competed at the junior, under 23, and senior level for Team GB. Looks like we got a lot of Princeton guys joining. This is good.
Yeah,
Um, and Tom and I know each other uh, very well
yeah,
because let me think. So fall of 2015, Tom, I show up on the scene in Princeton as the intern,
yeah,
um, and so you and I worked together and knew each other really well for those 2 years.
two years. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, fair. So um, so that's sort of how we know each other. And Tom is now on the Great Britain men's team. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you would have been competing in the Olympics this summer.
Yeah, as it stood, yeah. Had we
Right.
been, yeah, had it gone ahead.
Right. So obviously Tom has taken rowing to the fullest that he can, and so hopefully, are you planning on carrying on for 2021?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
No, very good, very good. So that's sort of how Tom and I know each other, and so I wanted to bring Tom on just to kind of give our folks at Pelham a different perspective on sort of rowing and collegiate rowing and sort of what Tom did in high school and all that. So um, Tom, if you don't mind telling us, like, what was your high school rowing experience and sort of like how did you get your start and sort of like go from there?
sure, sure. I was at Radley College, which is a school near Oxford, and has quite a strong rowing program, and has always been a team that's competed well in the high school scene in the UK, and I kind of at the moment is on a bit of a sort of Henley drought, and that became like the massive focus for us was trying to win Henley for the first time since I think it was '98 they won it,
Okay.
won it last, and so I was fortunate enough to be in the first 3 years there out of my five, which meant that I was kind of like fortunate enough to be put into a situation where I was rowing at quite a high level for a reasonable amount of time, especially the first 2 years that I was in that boat, and we had a serious program with guys who wanted to take it seriously. And I think I learned a lot from them in terms of like the older guys, especially my first year,
Mhm.
in terms of how to like go about doing my training, how to go about making sure that I was holding myself to like the standard that was required to be able to do well. And so
Mhm.
from there, obviously, fortunate enough to be selected for junior national team 2012. So those two sort of coupled together meant that it as a high school experience sort of led me into being able to obviously come to Princeton where we met.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I think so. Backtracking a little bit, Tom, because I do, because obviously we've got, I coach a lot of kids at Pelham,
Right.
and
Yeah. Sure. Sure.
just a little bit about our club, right? Like, I mean, I told you a lot about it when I first took the job.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
When Henrik Rummel and I were working together, we're trying to go from, from a place of, the kids love rowing,
Yeah.
uh, and how can we turn that into like a real passion, and like, maybe, we're not all going to be Olympians. We're not all going to be rowing at Princeton, right? But like,
Sure, yeah.
how can we turn that into something that it goes from maybe a hobby to, Division 1, division, whatever rowing, right? So
Right. Yeah.
for you, like, was it like a slow going process, or did you feel like you jumped into rowing right away and you were like, this is my sport?
Definitely a slow going process. I think
Okay.
it's one of those. It's definitely a sport as well that requires like a lot of commitment and when you're quite young, and so being at a point at which you kind of realize that that's the pathway you're going to go down didn't necessarily come that quickly to me.
Okay.
So like I played rugby a bit at school alongside rowing and always did the whole way through high school. And I think it was probably 2011 was the point at which I was like, right, okay, rowing's probably the sport that's like slightly taking over and taking the sort of forefront. But it wasn't necessarily like I picked up an oar, sat in a boat, and was like, this is what I want to do. In fact, it was probably the opposite. I think initially I was like, wow, okay, I'm not sure this is necessarily what I want to do. And it was kind of
Right.
like, it took a bit of time for me to come to a point where I realized that maybe I had attributes that I could transfer like higher up the ladder.
Right on. So I think there's a couple key things there for to highlight. We're talking about a guy who, for all intents and purposes, would have been competing on a world stage in the highest level of sport in the world at the Olympics this summer. And for him to kind of say he wasn't too sure about rowing at first, right? Like, I think that's really powerful because, as a coach, I start, just myself, I started coaching in high school. I took the internship at Princeton for a couple of years. Now I'm back on the high school level. You hear it all the time, right, Tom? It's like people sort of like almost despise rowing, right? In a lot of ways. It's like,
Right. Yeah.
it's like we don't think of it like it's this cool thing, like you're going to go like be a rugby or soccer star in England, or like a hockey or football star in the States, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like,
Right. Yeah.
so it's just, I think it's always refreshing to kind of hear that.
There's
You know,
definitely an element almost of like you fell into it because you couldn't do something else, right?
right.
And so for those first couple of years of doing it, you have like an element of resentment towards, not necessarily resentment, that's maybe the wrong word, but like resistance towards the path that it could lead you down. And then I feel like there'll be a moment where you'll embrace it. And at that point, then you're able to like kick on to the next level. And like, I know I look at it and going to Princeton, obviously when you're getting recruited, you're looking and to wherever you go, it doesn't have to be like the Ivy League schools or Cal or Washington, wherever you go, that you kind of like become part of something that is like bigger than your individual like career at that point. And so then you're
Right.
able to like commit to that. And that's the point at which, like, if you have a team around you, which seems to be the case at Pelham, you've built a team around the kids at which they feel comfortable, they feel at home, then that's the point at which you begin to enjoy it. And you have that switch moment where suddenly it's like you're not just rowing because there was nothing else to do, or like you didn't make the team elsewhere. You're actually then rowing because
Right.
you
Yeah.
want to turn up each day with the guys.
Right. I mean, that's very on point. And like, to be honest, like that piece for me as a coach, as a career coach, right? Like, that really bugs me that people sort of like, there's this misconception that you don't have to be an athlete to be a rower, right? Or like,
Right. Yeah.
It's like you didn't make the JV basketball team, and like, don't, like, fair play, right? Like that, there are stories about that, but yeah. So I think just like switching that mindset a little bit. But so obviously, like our connection is very strong, through the Princeton experience, right? So, and then another piece for us, right, at Pelham and all these other high school clubs and high school athletes
Right.
out there right now, you know, we are very focused, right, on getting kids, and they're very focused on getting themselves ready for the next level, right?
Okay. Yeah, of course.
Like, talk to me a little bit, Tom, about sort of like when did you realize that, you know, you could come to the States and potentially row at an Ivy League school? And then also, like, what did you do in terms of your academics and training a little bit to get yourself ready for that, right?
Right. So academics wise, firstly, I'll go with when I first realized it could be a thing that could work for me was probably just before that, the summer that I went to Junior Worlds, like 2012, probably just before Henley time. I think you obviously are at Henley, and for people who've been at Henley, they know that a lot of the US coaches are there, and US colleges have representation there, not necessarily on the water, but like coaches come along.
Right.
And so being in that like buzz, I sort of met a few people and got introduced to a few people, and then suddenly it's like, oh wow, this could be an opportunity that could be sort of applicable to me and could be something that I could do. But then you obviously know that just being there isn't enough. You've got to, like,
Right.
for me, then it was like, okay, I've got to go to put myself in the driving seat to be able to do this. If I want to do it, I've got to go to Junior Worlds this summer, or I've got to like improve this much on the erg to get to that level. And so that's probably the point at which I realized was just before that Junior World summer that it was something that, and that probably drove me on a bit for that Junior World summer, that something that could be attainable. How do I prepare for it? So I obviously still had a year at high school, and academically in the UK it's very different. Like, we don't do SATs or ACTs.
Okay.
So for that I had to get private tutoring to help me outside of my school course load to be able to take the SAT and do well, and like teach me how to do that. So that was like the academic side of it. But obviously if I was at a US high school, I wouldn't have had done that aspect of it, because that would have just been my schooling. But it would have just been like, okay, these are the focuses. These are the focuses that I need to make. And damn, so easy. What boat is this? These are the focuses that I need to like have
Right.
in the classroom. And like, obviously I don't know what they do now, but I had like SAT 2s, which are essentially just like defined on a single subject. And so it was like, okay, these are the subjects I'm going to do. I've got to like learn those aspects of it. And then the main SAT, which does the sort of reading, writing, maths, was like through my tutoring. And then I knew that on the side of that I had to have like a level of on my like training. So it'd be like, okay, I need to hit these goals on the erg to put myself in the driving seat for it. In that last year, I obviously had already been to Junior Worlds, so it was like I wasn't resting on that, but I knew that I already had that in the bank, which
Okay.
helped for me in that situation, in terms of like, it was a completely alien thing for me. And so I was like, okay, well, I've done this, so I know I'm like at least in the picture, I'm in the conversation. And like, it doesn't really mean anything until you go and like back it up and go and become like the standard that is required.
Right.
And I remember obviously Spencer Washburn was the coach doing the recruiting at Princeton, and he was like, okay, this would be a really good score on the erg. These would be the good scores we'd like for you to get on the SAT. And so that sort of like sets you up with like direct goals that you can hit. And you can be like, right, I need to get this score on the SAT, go and like just work towards that. And then the same with the rowing. It'd be like, okay, if you can go. And obviously with the recruiting, like there's probably a slight imbalance towards the erg. Actually, I don't know if it's an imbalance. I don't know if I said it's an imbalance, but there's like a focus on it, particularly with internationals. I feel like it's quite hard to be like, okay, I can't watch you row day in, day out, or like week in, week out. So let's put a focus on this aspect of it and see where we get to. So that meant that for me, it was like, okay, hit these speeds on the erg. And like, obviously I wasn't at those speeds yet. So it's like, I've got to go and work for that. And then the same with the SAT. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's also really refreshing to hear, because, you know, I guess what I take from that, there's really no secret, right? Like, it's not, you know, like I think there's this misconception, right, that it's like only the brightest, most athletic will get to that point. And like, there's something to be said for that. But I think what you're saying, and it's so true, is like, right, just invest in yourself, understand what it takes to get to that level, right? Open up the dialogue with these recruiting coaches, and you know, and also someone wants to know your 2K. You know, so I think the big thing is, right, for everyone listening at home, right, invest in yourself, take the time to understand the standards and just work towards them, right? So I guess moving from there, Tom, a little bit, you know, you were certainly a highly recruited athlete coming out of high school. How did you decide on Princeton?
Oh, it was kind of a weird one, I guess. Like I was sort of torn between Harvard and Princeton, and like visited both of them. Like, and I feel like I don't know if that's necessarily. I feel like that's not uncommon to be sort of like in a position, and obviously these coaches are leaning on you quite hard, and they're leaning on you like a lot, and want you to like commit to this or that, and they want you to like, you know, literally they want you to visit, and the next day be like, yeah, I'm coming, and just like par off all of your other recruitment trips, which is obviously like a weird one because, you know, you're allowed to go on 5 recruitment trips, and it's ridiculous to go to a 17, 18-year-old kid and say you can't visit all the schools you want to visit because we want you to commit right now. So that aspect of it is definitely strange. But yeah, like I guess how I land at Princeton was sort of having visited, and obviously I knew a few of the guys there already from the UK, like Fred in particular. Vistavel was one of the people that I knew pretty well, and he was there, and I knew some, like Charlie Shaw, a good mate from Radley, was like he told me that he'd already committed. So things like that definitely like contributed to it, because you knew the kind of athlete that was there or going to be there.
Right.
And then obviously just like meeting the guys on your official, you kind of like realize, and back then especially, the team was like building in a really cool direction, and it was something that I wanted to be a part of. Yeah. Yeah.
I was actually going to I'm kind of curious, like when, you know, and this is certainly not, I mean, obviously I am incredibly biased towards Princeton, and this is not a shot at them at all, but like when you were recruited there, Tom, they didn't really have the results of a Harvard or a Washington or a Cal or even or Brown to a certain extent, right?
Yeah.
Like
Brett, definitely.
Obviously Spencer and now Matt have like you know, that's without said, like they've really kind of taken the standards to the next level. And I'm sort of curious a little bit, and like this is not comparing like the rise of a Princeton to like a Pelham, for example, but it's like for our kids, I think when we talk about these things of like investing in something that maybe hasn't been as successful as other places, right?
Right.
Like just as for example, we have Romerica Rye 4 exits away from us on I-95. Romerica Rye is the best high school boys program in the country right now.
Okay.
They won, you know, they beat St. Paul's, Bobby the head of the Charles. They've won the youth nationals. I mean, these kids are like absolute studs right now.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, how did you see yourself? Like, kind of I guess what I'm wondering, were you attracted to transforming a place, or did you want to go more for the sure bet? You know what I mean?
I definitely I think I 100% was attracted to like building a place, because it's way more fun to be a part of something that, and like achieve something that like hasn't happened obviously for a while. What was it, 2006 Princeton last one sprints, and then dropped the ball at the IRAs, and so obviously there's like, you know, there's a history there. It was like in that time it got like, we obviously had the 2016 season. It was 10 years since Princeton had last stood on top of the podium, and so that was like something that obviously appealed massively. And then I guess like credit to the guys in that class of 2016, like the PKs, the Pat Ebbles, the Martins, the Freds, Ryan Barker, Northrop, those guys like who just were really keen to like be a part of something, create something new. And then when you went on your official and you visited that was pretty infectious, and you realized that the team was going to move in that direction.
Right. Yeah, because I just like, I think like, especially in today's world, like especially athletically, you know, and business wise, and like all these things, like we're always looking for instant gratification, right? And it's really important to understand that there are these avenues in life that might not be as attractive early on, like, and I think just investing in yourself and being a part of something on the come up is huge.
Well, you've got to think as well, like when I was being recruited, Harvard had obviously been pretty dominant on the East Coast, and Yale were pushing pretty hard to like get there, and fair play, did get there. But like Harvard was like clearly in a transition period. Like obviously they don't know if they'd necessarily admit that as like a place, but like they were clearly going to be in a transition period. They'd been at the top for basically 50 years, right?
Right.
And like a sudden massive change, like it's pretty hard to then like come in and like basically the only place you can go is down, is maintain or down, right? And so that's like obviously puts a lot of pressure on you as athletes, but also like at points, you know, if you're not then winning, you're then failing essentially.
Sure.
And that's like not necessarily that you don't want the challenge of like maintaining there, but like that's the expectation rather than it being like the achievement of like winning.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So I think based off that, like, talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about sort of like your experience at Princeton, both as an athlete and a student. And I think from the perspective of, you know, you're an international guy, you're coming into this very historic place,
Right?
Obviously the boathouse there. It looks like Phil Brunner's online. What's up, Phil?
Yeah.
You know, coming to a historical place, right? But like they had last stood on the podium in '06, right? You know, what do you think, Tom, defined your experience at Princeton? Like, what made it great? Maybe not so great at times, and sort of, you know, that sort of that stuff.
I think, speaking candidly, I say there's obviously like ups and downs to it massively. I think that best thing about it was definitely like the culture in my first couple of years there was just insane and so good, and everyone just wanted to get better. And I feel like potentially when we like won a couple of row cups at sprints, and like maybe that maybe fell away slightly, which it like, I'm not saying like definitely fell away, but I feel like that 2016 class that I've like mentioned a couple of times really built like an amazing culture for their like junior and senior years.
Right.
With the help of the classes above them. I'm not saying it was just them, but that's like, you know, kind of like we want to win and we're going to do everything we can. And they'd like call people out on their bullshit. And, you know, sorry if I can say that or not. Yeah. They call people out, and they'll, you know, they made sure that everyone would like hold themselves accountable, and would be like, this is the level of the team and we want it to be here. Like I remember Ed Northrop calling me out a couple of times, just like one time in the boat, I think it was just like 12 miles of like steady state.
Right.
And after one 3-mile leg, Craig's kind of like, how is it? And I was like, oh, I just don't think we're really like on it today. Like, it doesn't feel that punchy thing. And Northrop from the bow was just like, you're the stroke man, sort it out, basically. And I obviously like took this like a red rag to a bull and was livid, just booted it for the rest of the session, but like completely transformed the set. Like, not saying that I transformed the session, but I just changed my attitude a little bit because someone called me out for like not having necessarily the attitude of the standard we expected. And then, you know, the session gets better. And like the way in which that culture in those first couple of years was just like pretty insane and really cool to be a part of. And obviously we had like some amazing results and some great moments. You know, we beat Harvard on the Basin. That in 2016, that was wild. Which was wild, exactly. And like the conditions were horrific. And I remember being there, and it was, what was it, like 6:50 start time, something like that, like in the morning.
Yeah. Waves coming over the bows.
Yeah, waves coming over the bows, and just like went and got the job done, which was epic. Had some really cool races against Brown in my time there. Obviously, like medals at sprints, medals at IRAs. California trip was insane. So there's so many like amazing things to be a part of. And when you become part of that program, and I remember like the first time you walk into the boathouse and you walk in, and there's like, you know, it's like the brown wooden like veneer and all the trophies in the trophy cabinets. Then you walk into the erg room, and it's just like 60 ergs lined up. And then you don't really kind of get the sort of sense of that until like a 6K day, where the whole boathouse has a 6K.
Sure.
And just like every erg is full with someone sort of just getting after it. And that's really cool. And then you'd all go and like have meals together, and you kind of like became part of this amazing team.
I was going to say, what you keep kind of referencing is the power of the team and the power of the group, right? And I think, like if we, like, again, just trying to relate it back a little bit to the
of course.
You know, like when I first came to the club, right, like it was this thing where a lot of kids knew how to row singles, but they preferred to be in the single versus the big boat, right?
Right.
It was just like what we've seen and like what you're referencing. And I think, again, for the kids listening at home, like this is what's awesome about collegiate rowing, both on the men's and women's side, right? The power of the group, right? And the tradition that backs that up. And I think it's really important to learn those skills as a young, you know, as a young person coming up, right? That you can really lean on the group and, let it be okay to kind of like call each other out and like have the same values and go through that experience together, right? Because then, like Tom, like you're saying, you get those wins on the basin against Harvard that are super hard to come by, right? Or you come across that Row Cup and whatnot.
Exactly.
So quick interjection. I do have to say, looking through sport graphics photos in 2016, speaking of the Row Cup, you had a really nice haircut. Who gave you that haircut in 2016?
Horrific, I think it was. I just sort of shaved the sides down. Yeah. No, yeah, really. Do you still doing haircuts for the people?
Yeah, I do. I do them once in a while. I cut my brother's hair once in a while, but no, I just had to ask just because it was such a nice haircut.
It was beautiful.
I felt like really, Tom, I really felt like that really contributed to that silver medal at Eastern Sprints that year for the varsity 8.
The hair.
The hair, yeah, the
hair, just like pure shaved, yeah.
I think if we had trimmed the sides down a little bit more, we would have caught in Yale, but I don't know.
I don't know about that.
So I guess the last thing sort of about the Princeton stuff, and then we can jump into a few other things before we get too off track, but what do you feel like, Tom?
Yeah.
Really, like, what do you think defines a group, right? And I say that because, like, I think high school kids, Tom, have a really difficult time with. Ben said that's a fair question.
It's a fair question, yeah.
How do you what makes a group, like, again, because obviously I was there, like I was a fly on the wall, basically, just like coming up to the ranks, just like learning them and soaking it all in and just watching you guys do your thing, right? And 2015, 2016, 2017 were 2 really good years, but for different reasons, right? What do you feel like, especially that 2015, 2016 year, like what about that group made it so special? And like what can the high school kids listening at home take away from that?
I think just like there was a willingness to go out and work, and a willingness to hold each other to that standard and hold each other accountable. And that was while we were at the boathouse. But there was also like an understanding that like guys had different motives away from the boathouse in terms of like academics and what they wanted to achieve. And so that like made the group a pretty tight knit group in terms of like everyone respected other people's like decisions and what they wanted to do away from the boathouse, but created an atmosphere where when we were at the boathouse, we were all on the same track. Like even you come into the boathouse, you're there for 2 hours at a time, and in that 2 hours that you're there, it was like, okay, this is the focus for this 2 hours, and then you can go back and people had like senior theses to write or junior papers. There were external pressures, and we were able to sort of handle them in such a way that no one at any point, I think, felt that they were neglecting like an aspect of that. And that in turn then creates that level of respect between people, where people understand that you might not be on form 100% every time you turn up and get on the machine or on the water, but understand that as long as you're willing to like commit to what that team's focus is and what that the process is in that particular session, you're able to like set yourself up in such a way that you do perform well. I guess we were very tight knit away from the boathouse as well that year, like aside from, or in those 2 years, aside from just like doing the classes, whatever classes you're doing and what clubs you were in and things. We were a very tight knit group in those 2 years, and we had a group of guys like led from the top in that 2016 year down, and that like carried through the next year. And those guys who were juniors stepped up as seniors, like took that on really well. And they and so I think I ultimately think that that's where like the strength of the team lies, is in like creating the culture, particularly in programs like Princeton or at high school level, where you kind of like you set your goals out right at the start of the year, and you're like, we want to win, Eastern Sprints or the IRA Regatta, and so then that's your focus for the year. And obviously, it's that it's a 4-year process for each athlete, but that you have to get a result in that year, and so it's like all about the culture that you can create for the team and the mark that you can then leave like in the turnover of each year group, in order to then keep that winning culture together and keep those goals as something that can be like attained and achieved.
Right. So it's like, I guess what I'm hearing you say really is power of the group, but also respecting individuality.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah.
And because that Tom, that's really well said. Number one. Number two, that is absolutely something that we deal with, and this is not just a Pelham thing. This is high school kids everywhere.
Right.
They
But
have,
that's such a fine balance, right? Because I feel
right.
like it's very easy to be like, okay, you want to respect individuals, and you do, don't get me wrong, you absolutely do. But the individuals have to also understand on an individual level, you have to understand that there is a goal for the team to achieve, and you can't sort of rot the apple from the core, in terms of like, if you're not happy with the way that something's handling, or the boat you've been put in, or like what someone said to you, or like if they're, people calling you out on something, if you like that story about Ed to me,
Right.
if people, you can't then try to undermine the team from the inside. And I feel like that's where it's the really fine sort of tightrope, is that if people, people can fall either way, and they can fall to the side where they're like, sure, like I'm here for this team, I want to do this. Or they can be like, no, this sucks. Like the coach is wrong. You guys are
Right.
wrong. Like I did this at Junior Worlds or whatever. And
right.
therefore I know best. Or like I won Henley when I was at high school, and therefore I know best in like a bigger program. Because then in trying to create a culture that's positive, you actually create a really negative culture that will not work and go slow.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's really good. So let's jump a little bit into some stuff about your GB experience, and sort of, I guess, number one, first and foremost, right? Everyone right now across the world, right? We're dealing with this whole COVID-19 pandemic situation, if you will, right? With that said, like, how are you, Tom, like formulating your training, your mindset through this period of time? Because you've now gone from, I made the Olympics, to the Olympics are all of a sudden postponed. I'm no longer officially selected, and now I'm also living back at my parents' house, right? How does that look? Like, talk to us a little bit about like the circumstances surrounding that, and like your mindset, and like how do you push on with your training despite the circumstances?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that you've got to understand, and my friend, I don't know if he's still here, James Goebel sent me like an article like a paper the other day. And I think the biggest thing is just like that ultimately there's like a mundanity to it that is a positive. And like every day, you're not going to be like, that was the best session I've ever done. You get off the earth. If someone asked you after every session, they're like, how was that? It's like, yeah, fine. Like it happened. I did it. Well, it's like, if you were saying, then you'd be like, that was the best thing ever. That is, either you've got your definition of what's like good wrong, or you're going to win the Olympics by curvature, which just isn't going to happen. So It's kind of like there's like a mundanity to it that is necessary, but can obviously make it a massive challenge because you're just training by yourself. So I'm, every morning wake up and end up going down to my garage, getting on the erg, or going out. I've been getting out on the road bike quite a lot, which has been great. To like mix it up and cross train, particularly when it's like just a steady state day. It's really good to be able to just like go out on the roads and just sort of change the pace a little bit. And like obviously when you're on the erg, you have your splits, and you're able to just like look at your splits the whole time and like use that as a marker. But when you're on the bike, you're able to just sort of like let it go slightly and use a different modality to try and keep your training. And time under duress is vital. And if you can go out and do sort of like 2-3 hours on the bike, you're able, with the heart rate sitting at like 130, then you're able to, that's like good base work. The motivation side of it is a massive challenge, obviously, because like you said, you've gone from, I'm going to race the Olympics this summer, to the Olympics has been postponed and I'm not selected anymore. And so where do I stand now in the sort of grand scheme of things? But then I guess quite a comforting thought. It's just been like, okay, the goal stays exactly the same. It's just been moved down the road a little bit. And so how do I best prepare myself to be able to perform when I need to as a result of that? And kind of like an ultimately slightly no factor in terms of that aspect of it. Like I've got to be able to just like do my job for the guys who I was in a boat with or in a team with, because I'm doing my job and I know that they're doing their job, and that's like massively motivating to know that we have a Google Doc and people are entering their scores in and their steady state times and things like that, and pieces, and you're able to like feed off that, and that they're holding you accountable by putting out good scores, and in return you're going to hold them accountable by pushing the envelope as well.
Yeah, because I think like right now it's like we can't be on the water, and we want to be
Right.
safe, we want to be smart, we have to follow the rules, and and what have you. And I think we always, and I want to jump into the training piece a little bit, just briefly, but like I feel like people really see the erg as, for lack of a better term, torture device.
Right. Okay.
And fair play, it's a brutal machine. It's super honest. You can't hide from it.
Right.
And it creates scenarios that you have to basically deal with your demons, if you will, right?
Right.
How do you, because obviously I know a little bit about the GB system, talking with you and just other stuff too. Like I'm under the impression that you guys do quite a bit of erg training that your head coach mandates that you do. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah. It's like a vital part of your training, and it's very sport specific, and you're able to make massive gains physiologically using it.
So how do you, Tom, like what would you say to a high school kid listening right now, or Buick Copley who's asking horrible questions?
Yeah. Well, Elon never even said that.
What would you say to, like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is how would you flip the script, right? How would you go from, I hate the erg, it's the middle of May, I want to be racing at Youth Nationals in Sarasota in June, to I'm going to accept my current circumstances and I'm going to push on with my training, whether like you're on the erg or on the bike for a couple hours or
right.
Yeah. How do you see that?
Right. I think the first thing is just that like you've got no control over it, right? You've got no control over the fact that you're not going to be at Youth Nationals in June, and so there's no point wasting any energy and like mental and emotional energy in sitting there and like being stressed about that, because you've got no control, and it's quite like you just got to sort of let it go, and it's quite like calming thought when you do, because ultimately it's like a process driven thing, and you're in a picture, you're in like a situation here where like it's completely unique, and I understand that, and like there are points that you definitely don't necessarily want to be just like sitting on the erg getting after it, especially when the weather's good, the water's flat, but and I understand that's a challenge. I guess the ultimate thing is that, and okay, there is a group of people who are like seniors at high school, right, who this applies to slightly less, because obviously you've lost, and like seniors at college as well, you kind of lost that senior season, and so you're going on to different things. But I guess like by this stage you've already been recruited to colleges, and so now you're just sort of like laying the groundwork for that, and you can sit there and be like, oh, I wanted to be racing now and I'm not, so I can not train anymore, and I might just sort of sit around and feel a bit sorry for myself. Or it's kind of like, right, you can bet that I'll be ready to attack like the first session of next season when I get into my new college team, or when I'm back at Pelham or my high school team. Just like you have a job to do to maintain the ethos and where you sit within your team, and like at this stage there's nothing you can do to alter anything that's going on around us, and so why not just buy into the situation that's presented to you? And yeah, it's going to suck, and there are definitely going to be points when you're going to really struggle with getting on the erg in the like first thing in the morning or whatever time of day you do it, and like some days will be easier than others for sure, and I understand that, and that's why I think it's quite good to be able to cross train at points, like go for a run or get on the bike, and like running's great, like holds you accountable, make sure that you learn to carry your own weight, and you're able to utilize that as an element of your training. And so there are like a lot of factors in play, but ultimately right now it's like a weird one, and if you're sitting around, like the whole world is in a very weird place, and if you're sitting around feeling sorry for yourself, then you've kind of got the whole gist of this wrong. Like this is an opportunity, right, for you to put in work that other people aren't willing to. And so like you can, in this situation, I'm sitting here and I'm like, right, I can put in work that other people might not want to, and it's a totally human thing to not want to, right? It's totally human, but it's the point at which you sort of go out and make sure, and just like the turning up, and like on the days when you don't want to, you just turn up, and then by the time you've turned up and you've sat on the machine or the bike, or you've got running, if you're running, you're just putting one foot in front of the other, and then eventually you get to the point where you're into it, and then it's all fine. And it's like that first little bit just keep turning up every day, because you can make a difference that other people aren't willing to.
Yeah, no, that's huge. That's really powerful. And because that's obviously something that, because as the coach of the program, right, like I'm very sensitive to that fact, right, where it's like the motivation is tough right now to come by. So that's for sure good stuff to hear. Now, a little bit more in the training thing. So I'm actually reading this book right now.
Yeah.
Called
Okay.
I don't know if you've read this.
I haven't read it, no, but I saw you post it yesterday. I was actually going to message you and ask about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, John Lally, what's up, man?
Oh, the legend.
Oh, first beat, what's good?
Oh, the legend.
So the book is by this Canadian runner called Alex Hutchinson, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so the title is Endure, Mind, Body, and the Curiously Elastic Lemons of Human Performance.
Right. Yeah.
Now, obviously, without disclosing all kinds of ERG scores and training sessions and whatnot, like it's fair to say that you've gotten to the point as a rowing athlete where you're very high class, right? You're in terms of your output on the machine and on the water. You've got the results to back it up. How much of that, Tom, do you feel like you can attribute to your, I don't know, genetic gifts?
Right. Yeah.
In your training, and how much of that do you feel like you can attribute to your mindset? And the reason why I bring that up, and the reason why I bring up this book, Endure, is because the way that this Canadian runner, Alex Hutchinson, frames it, and he was a very high-level runner, I think, like, I don't know, Canadian, like, Olympic trialist, at least.
Right.
You know, he's super good, middle distance runner.
Yeah.
His hypothesis, Tom, and he actually references a lot of British people, which is pretty interesting. He's got, Shackleton, this dude, Henry Worsley,
right.
Barrels, guys like that, right? Like, talk to us, I guess, a little bit about like the mind over matter stuff. And like, again, Hutchinson's hypothesis is like, we all have these gifts, right?
Love them. Love the scans. Love them.
We all have these gifts, right? Whether you're really tall or really muscular or really lean, or you have low body fat percentage, or you got huge lungs or whatever, right? How much of your success do you feel like is your gifts versus your mindset? And on days when it's time to go, right? Whether you're on the World Championships starting line in the men's 8, or you're at the IRA with Princeton, talk to us a little bit about that, like the mindset.
Yeah. So you kind of like want to touch on the like, does natural talent exist argument, which is like a phenomenal argument that gets debated over and over again. I don't know if Matt Benstead's still here, but I know that he's very much like a natural talent doesn't exist, and I actually sort of tend to agree slightly. And I think that there are like outlying scenarios. Like, what is it? There's a stat that like 70% of NHL hockey players were born in like January, February, because that's the point at which they start each year group, and so therefore you're just like bigger and older when you get selected, which is quite like that's like an interesting point. And I guess that on the genetic side of it, I could be like, well, I was always big and fast, so when I was playing rugby, when I was like 8, 9, 10, I was always big and fast, so then it was like, okay, you're in the team, and then you get the better coaching and you're exposed to that, and maybe that's like an argument that's in there. But in terms of like rowing, I think it's an interesting one, because there's definitely like elements of it, but there's also like how much do you want it, and how as an individual, and particularly when you're on the machines, and then that translates into the boats, that you get set goals and told what would be like a good score to go and get and achieve, and then you sort of have to go about getting it, and sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, and how do you respond to that is always interesting. I guess sort of like your attitude to it, your technique on it, and your levels of determination, and how you feel in those situations. I don't know, I'd say that for me, like, this from when we were at Princeton, like, I don't know, I probably didn't really win pieces day in, day out at Princeton, but it was like the test pieces, I'd always make sure were like 100%, right? And so I guess for me, there was always like more of a process to it than just like putting myself in a hole like every day of the week. It was like, okay, this is where I'm at. Like, I want to be really consistent with it and like keep stepping on, but it doesn't have to be like, I didn't want like huge variations in my training. And like, I don't know, like maybe you have some people who'd be like winning it one day and then like fifth the next, and then win it again, and that doesn't necessarily contribute towards achieving your like long-term goal as you like watch the graph progress. You want to just like keep
Right.
stepping up those steps really gently and really steadily, and make sure that it's not just like one max effort and then you're done for the next day and then you can have another max effort, because that doesn't really help you to like achieve your goals. In terms of like the natural talent thing, I think that particularly in rowing, you can do whatever you want to do with like within reason. I'm not going to be like, okay, like a lightweight can't suddenly go 540, right? That doesn't happen. But you can put yourself in a position to achieve what you want to achieve in the sport of rowing through like the attitude that you bring, and on the days when it counts, how you can perform. And an element of that is how you can react under pressure, right? And
Right.
how you can like handle pressure when there's a point at which, you know, it's like, I'm pushing you now to perform. I want you to like perform on this day, go and do it. And being able to like make that step into that like next level, that is something that I'm not saying not everyone has, but I think that there's definitely an element of that you kind of have to like train that in. You can't just like do it on the day.
Right. Let me frame it this way too, and I want to put you on the spot a little bit. You guys are chasing down the Germans. There's no secret. How much of their success do you think is physical talent versus the mentality?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of it's probably the mentality, particularly now, because
Yep.
they've built like an ether around themselves at which, you know, and they kind of have this like aura of being sort of untouchable almost. And so,
Right.
like, if that's the case, then, you know, when I look at it in terms of raw numbers, you'd say that 0% of it is talent. You know,
Yeah.
when you look at like
Yeah,
the raw
because
numbers.
who is it? Your guys' homer on World Rowing is Martin Cross, and he gets on there all the time, and he's like, the German guys have like an erg average of 555 or whatever, and it's like
Right, but then that's an element of it, isn't it? Of like, you know, you don't have natural talent necessarily. You've just got the focus and the attitude to bring to be able to improve your technique to a point at which you, every time you're on the water, you're applying what you do have to the best that you can, and you can hone what you have in terms of like your output, and you can improve that. But there's like that whole other aspect to it that is the technique that brings you to the point of being able to apply that like other aspect, you know?
Right. Yeah, no, I'm just really curious about this because I've certainly seen where, you know, and I think that this is where coaches kind of fall into the trap of, let me just try to get the biggest ergs in the boat and make it go. And there's certainly an argument to be made for that.
Yeah.
But sort of where I found success, and I would say you as well, is that looks like people are trying to pull erg scores here, but the mindset piece, right? And I'm also curious, Tom, like, what do you feel like? What's your mentality crossing the 1,000, right? Like, you're at rate 40. You know, Tom, I'll never forget the 2016 IRA, watching your boat go down the track from the gazebo in the last 500. You guys, obviously, Cal was out by about a length, but you guys are nipping on the heels of Yale.
Yeah.
Right? And you stroked that varsity that spring. What's your mentality there? Like, what's your mindset in those racing situations? Because I say that because this is something that I feel like is very much a learned skill and a practiced behavior, right?
Of course, yeah.
Like talk to us a little bit about your mindset in those situations.
I guess well, I'm assuming that we're behind, right? So I guess like at that point, you know, you've got to like trust what you've done leading up to that point, not in the race necessarily, but in like the season, every stroke you've taken, right? Up to that, so you've got to like trust that aspect of it and understand that you're able to basically commit to it, and you know that essentially if you're behind, you've got to roll the dice to some extent, and how are you able to do that to you know, change the result? And I think in that race we actually did get out ahead of Yale, and then they came back through us. I think the race was probably 12 strokes too long for us, or 10 strokes too long for us, and we got in. I think we did get into second, and then because I think we were up 40-ish, maybe higher from about the K. So
Sure.
And I guess that's an aspect of what you're saying. Is it was like, right, here we go. We're not in the position we wanted to be in. Let's go. Like, we've got to roll the dice here and see what we've got. And I know that the 7 guys sitting behind me are capable capable of producing something here.
Right. So that, again, you keep referring back to this whole thing about trust and the group mentality, and it's very much on point. So uh, we'll finish shortly here. I guess a couple more things. Like, who have been some of your biggest rowing influences? Whether it's technical, physical, mental, could be teammates, coaches, parents, whatever. Like
Yeah.
who, how do you see, how do you see those influences, and sort of like, where do you turn to when times get tough in terms of that stuff?
Yeah. Interesting. I guess probably like technically, I guess like high school coach. Very fortunate to have a very technical high school coach who taught me how to row. So I guess that's where I probably look to, is like the technical thing. But obviously that's like set my basis for how I row, and that's obviously changed and adapted with different boats that I've been in over the years. And so now it's like now it's just like something that's sort of, I guess, like somewhat malleable to like the boat and the situation that you're in. So I wouldn't say I necessarily, like, I look back on that very fondly, and I know that he's someone that you can always talk to about something like that. But it's not like, technically speaking, I'd say that he's probably the guy that set me up, at least,
Right.
as a rower. And then I guess motivationally, it's always like an interesting one as to where you turn in those situations. And like I've found of late that the best place to turn is actually just into the team and the guys you're in a boat with, because if you're having thoughts almost and you're in a boat, then like, you're not necessarily doubts, just like, quite a lot of nervous energy around today. Like, why is that? Like, we're chasing down the Germans, as you said. Then they're probably feeling very, very similar in that situation. And so it's pretty always good to be able to like talk it through with them. And then I guess you sort of just realize, you like sit back and you realize that like it's not really worth committing energy to worrying about something that hasn't happened yet, because then you just sort of sit there and stew whilst, I'll focus on that stroke when that stroke comes along, because that's the only point at which it really matters.
Sure.
And so obviously you've laid like a huge foundation to get there in the training that you've done. But the individual strokes that you're going to take throughout the race aren't, and like what's going to happen in the first 200 meters, it's not really worth worrying about until you're in the first 200 meters.
Right.
Like what's going to happen off the start. Don't worry about that when you're sitting in your hotel room waiting to go and race, because that doesn't matter until you're doing it, and if you sit there, you're going to overthink it and probably then do it wrong.
You're right.
Yeah. I think Ben States actually mentioned Shep, and Shep's someone he's the under-23 coach for the under-23s. You're obviously the GB under-23s even, obviously, yeah. And he is someone that, like, even now you can just drop a text to and have a phone call with, and he is always there to like talk things through with you about whatever, like good, bad, positive, negative. He's just like this guy, and I guess he's in an amazing situation where he's brought guys through on like this like 4-year, kind of like a college coach, right? You bring people through on like a 4-year program of under 23 stuff, and like every summer you go back and train with him, and then and so then when you get into the team, he's around a bit and you know him pretty well by that stage, and you're able to like, and he's not one of the coaches, with the team, with the like senior team. So he's someone that is slightly removed from it, but has enough of like his foot in the camp that you can get the right advice from him without it necessarily being like it's someone who's going to like give away what you're thinking to like the other coaches if it's like a private conversation. He's like removed enough. Obviously Greg's someone who's massively helpful. Like that's again like a 4-year program. I was under his sort of tutelage for 4 years, and I was very close with Greg, and is someone that you can always like talk to about training and racing and how it's going. Same with Coach Smith. They're just very approachable people that you can always go and like turn to.
Right.
If you and I'm sure that it's like a weird one, because obviously you're like out of that system now, and so they're sitting there and they're like, well, why do you want to like ask me? But then it's sort of rowing's a sport, a weird sport in which you kind of create these like relationships that do sort of last, because you like go through things as a team and as athletes. So those are probably the people I'd like to turn to the most, I guess. Yeah, my biggest advice would just be to like talk things through with the guys you're in boats with, or just in your team. They don't necessarily have to be in boats with you, because everyone has a different role to play in a team, and everyone has a position within a team where they can contribute. And so like this guy who might be he might be in the 3V, he might not be like the top guy in that, but and someone in the varsity is sort of like struggling with something, but people make observations and people see things that you don't necessarily know, and that person might be able to lend you like the sound advice that you need at that given point.
So just to kind of put that into one sentence here is, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, exactly. And don't be afraid to like turn to people you think, like me talking to Greg, for example, like that's something I haven't read for Greg for like 3 years now, but like he's still someone that I could just shoot a text and be like, I'm just kind of struggling with like this aspect of things, or like,
right,
or this aspect's going really well, but I'm not really sure why, like, and then
right,
it's just like opening that dialogue. It's really great.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a big, I think it's interesting, especially in our sport of rowing, because we are, in a lot of ways, we kind of operate, and this is not a shot at Team GB, we kind of operate behind closed doors and we don't let a lot of information out.
Right.
And that's fine. Like ERG scores, all that, like no problem. That's, fair game. Like keep it secret. But it's more like how do our athletes like you or Henrik Rummel, who used to work at Pelham, or right, like these people who rise to the top, like they have these human emotions too, and they're not just robots, right? And it's
right.
like, just, I think that's really important to hear. Wrapping up with this, what would you, Tom, tell your high school self, based on what you know now, like based on the experiences you've gone through, like, I don't know if it's, I'm not trying to say like, what would you change? More like, what would the advice be to Tom George, in high school?
Kind of just like, to probably enjoy it more, in terms of just like having the outlook of being like, oh, this is great all the time, and like it's something that you're able to do that. And especially when you're competing in like fast boats, not many people get the opportunity to do that, and it's quite a surreal experience. So probably like enjoy it and embrace it more. And obviously some sessions absolutely suck, but you can sort of embrace that, and then if you embrace those, then the enjoyment comes down the line. And then probably just to like keep not like I said earlier, like not worry about things that you can't control and don't matter, in terms of right. What's going to happen in races, or like at the moment we have this like huge uncertainty over like when we're next training as a team, or when we're next together, like things like that. Just obviously it's really hard and they massively weigh on your mind, but what's the best way to go about like staying focused and staying on track is to just like let those things go slightly. And I think especially when I was at Princeton, probably was able to like overthink things a bit and get sort of worked up or frustrated, and when I was like in a boat or like on the erg, and then probably then you don't have like the best session that you could have in that given situation, and right. That's like obviously detrimental, and then you can quickly like spiral down, and you're like, okay, that wasn't good enough, why wasn't that good enough, and then you overthink that. So just sort of like letting those things go a bit.
Take it day to day.
Right?
Day at a time. We always say on my team is trust the process. It's
Joel Embiid,
baby, let's go. We have, according to Instagram, we have 1 minute and 20 seconds remaining. I didn't know there was a time limit on these things. But Tom, thank you so freaking much for coming on, my friend.
No, of course, it's been great. Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Appreciate this. So good to see you.
You too, man.
Good luck the rest of the way. Obviously, you and I will touch base throughout.
Yeah, for sure.
And again, got people listening from Pelham, right? Take this to heart. Make it your own thing. Keep attacking the training, and we'll get through this together. Tom George, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.
Yeah. Cheers, Reed. Thanks very much, man. Appreciate it.
Yep.
All right.